So a few days ago I released a video about the A1 police car pile-up after a high-speed pursuit with a BMW 5 Series about 2:30 in the morning on Wednesday the 9th of April. So 5 police cars were wrecked and 7 police officers went to hospital. So I released this video outside Newcastle Crown Court, having just been inside the courtroom where Mazia Azabunyard was being sentenced, and it lasted for over an hour, and listened to the blow-by-blow detailed account in legal terms as well as to exactly how that incident happened and unfolded. And it was fascinating. I'd say, I kid you not, about 98% of the comments on this video have just blown my mind, really. Clearly, there are huge sections of our population who get their news and updates on current affairs through gorging and munching on social media conversation threads, because I hate to be brutally honest, the ignorance and the hate is astonishing. It's staggering. It's scary. I cannot tell you. It's and the amount of criticism that's been levied towards the police and their response is just so wildly off the mark. I thought I'd better do this video so I can explain to you in a much more detail than my previous video about exactly what happened. And I guarantee by the end of this video you will have almost a complete understanding of exactly what happened on that night, and it'll put you in a better position to draw your own opinions about what happened. It's really important, I think, as well, to understand some context as to why I'm explaining this, who am I. But I think you're going to find my account of this incident really interesting, because after spending about 14 years in the military, straight from school, bit of a hop, skip and a jump, I joined the police. So I retired from the police after about 19 years, 8 years ago. And I want to get out the bag straight away that I have no blanket loyalty towards the police. What I do have is a fierce loyalty and desire about what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's factual, what's the truth. That's where my loyalty lies. And if you've been following this channel, you will know a couple of years ago I did a video about 2 Newcastle United fans who were arrested outside the Etihad Stadium in Man City because they had a flare. I was literally within meters when the 2 lads were arrested by the police. I took a lot of exception as to how they were dealt with. I seen their charge sheet. They were charged with an offence that they didn't commit, despite their solicitor encouraging them to plead guilty and then to fight any potential banning order. I gave them advice to plead not guilty because I was confident that the case would be dropped, and it was. So during those 2 or 3 videos, I really criticised the police because of that whole incident. But also a recent video I did about shoplifting at a particular post office stroke newsagents in Lowerfell in Gateshead. I launched scathing criticisms on the police because of the lack of professionalism, empathy, compassion. They really let the shopkeeper down, who's been experiencing some extraordinary levels of kids just coming in, and as they do now, just picking up alcohol, walking out without a care in the world. Badly let down the police, and I called them out for that, and they needed to be called out for that, and they deserved to be called out for that. I've got no blanket loyalty towards the police, but where they do a good job, which is most of the time in my opinion, I heap the praise and admiration on them. For example, the Sycamore Gap trial, I thought they were excellent. So you can be rest assured that my opinions and the accounts I'm going to give you about this incident is straight from the heart and straight down the line. So you can imagine, after 14 years in the military, after about 19 years in the police, and 4 years ago I was officially diagnosed as being autistic. That's not through some faddy online test that I did. That's a proper NHS process. I've developed through my life as being a man that's a straight talker. I say how it is, and I don't suffer fools. What this experience in the police will do, in particular for this case, is that having heard the detailed account of what happened during this incident, I can also fill in some of the gaps with some sense of reasonable accuracy. I can kind of explain things from almost like a police officer's point of view, even though I wasn't there. That's going to give you insights as to what happened on that night that you're not going to hear or see anywhere else. And on top of that, during my years in the police, I was pursuit trained. I have been involved in countless pursuits, both as a driver and as a passenger and as a backup vehicle. So you're going to get this unique perspective of what went on. In the comments section, there are some common themes, topics about the criticisms being levied towards the police, and that includes comments, for example, like, all this just for a tail light or a brake light, or the police, they're just not trained, they were reckless, they were dangerous, they're all about ego, they weren't paying attention, it was over the top, they should have just backed off, they should have just went and knocked on the lad's door a few days later, they should have had drones, they should have had an unmarked vehicle following this other car. All sorts of nonsense. I forgot to mention, and not least, the main criticism was the rear police vehicle, the unmarked vehicle, which ploughed into the back of the police cars. It was all that driver's fault because he was going too fast. He should have just been following at a safe distance, wasn't paying attention, and wasn't trained to the right standards. Right, let's get into the detail, blow by blow, from the beginning of this incident, which started about 10 to 2 in the morning of Wednesday the 9th of April. There was a marked police car in the west of the gated area, somewhere in the Swalwell Wickham area. I'm not entirely sure exactly where, but this BMW 5 Series come to the attention of that officer. I'm not sure if that officer was single crewed or had a colleague in with them in the car, I don't know. But the BMW come to their attention because I think it was described as flying around, but it was speeding in that sort of area, which obviously caught the attention of the police. But it also had a rear light that was defective. I can't remember if it was a tail light or a brake light, but it doesn't matter. So clearly, at that moment, the vehicle is of interest. It's a Wednesday morning. It'll be dead in that area of Newcastle, and there's a BMW flying around with a defective tail light. So that vehicle was going to be stopped. So the marked police vehicle will have tagged on behind at some point, and for the next, I'd imagine, 30 seconds to a minute, they would have carried out what you call PNC and local intelligence requests and searches on that vehicle. So they'd pass the VRM, the registration, to the control room. They'll do a PNC check. They'll want to know about, is any registered keepers, any insurance details, are there any markers on the vehicle, for example, drugs or weapons, but also any local intelligence on that vehicle that might be held in relation to what is known as to who might be driving it, any other previous sightings, any other interest that might be linked with any sort of criminal activity. So before that officer activated their blue lights and possibly sirens to pull that vehicle over, they had a fair idea of everything that was possible to be known about that BMW. Subsequently, what we do know about Mazio Azabunyard is that he only had a provisional license, he had no insurance, and he'd come to be in possession of the vehicle only very recently, and I'm not certain of the entire circumstances of how he come into possession of the vehicle. But it's entirely likely when they carried out those P&C checks that there was probably, well, likely an out-of-date ownership record of who was on the vehicle. The vehicle was likely it'll have no insurance linked to the vehicle. I think it was MOT'd. But importantly, it's likely that when they did the checks, they didn't know who was driving the vehicle. And Mazior, as well as previously, has no convictions or cautions. So he's not on a police record. So it's entirely likely that when they did the checks and about to pull it over, they knew nothing about the driver, but they did know that there was no insurance on it. So there was some ambiguity about the vehicle, about who might be driving it. It's speeding around and it's got a defective rear light. So now the police are really interested in this vehicle. At this time, around about 1:50 in the morning, other officers in the gated area will be aware of what's going on and have half an ear and listening to proceedings. These are routine stops, but other officers will know that are in the area, and also the control room will know and will be monitoring what happens next. So when the officer then decides to pull the BMW over, gets out of the car and walks towards the BMW makes off. Now, the officer will have then communicated that immediately on their radio to the control room. Now the situation has escalated significantly. Why, the officer will be thinking, and everybody else listening, why has that vehicle made off? Like I said before, likely who's driving it. Now, why has it made off? Has that person just committed a crime? Were they about to commit a crime? Have they kidnapped somebody? Are they carrying weapons that they don't want to be found? Do they have a stash of drugs in the car that they don't want to be found? Is he, the driver, a drink driver or under the influence of drugs? All sorts of possibilities will have been going through the officer's mind at that point, which has escalated the importance that that vehicle now needs to be stopped. Either crimes have been committed or in the process of being committed, or the ability of the driver to control the vehicle due to alcohol or drugs could be in question. And as police officers know, people get hurt and people get killed by individuals who shouldn't be driving. Although it wasn't specifically mentioned at court, we can come to a reasonable assumption that other police units will have flooded that area, come to the area to try and see if they can find this BMW, and likely included traffic officers as well. And some or all of those police officers, I'm assuming all of them, will be pursuit trained. It's a very intensive training course. Pursuits, as I said before, when I was in, are carried out regular by the police. It's a process which is tightly controlled and managed through the control room inspector, or their civilian equivalent. And during a pursuit, they will give a running commentary of what's happening. They will give an update as to the speed of the vehicle, the direction of the vehicle, the manner of driving of the vehicle, the conditions of the road, etc. And then every few seconds or so, we'll update the control room inspector as to the risk that the situation is. They might say, we're in low risk at the moment. From what I've heard in court, it was flying around. It might be medium risk. It could be higher. But these officers are trained and do this sort of procedure regularly. Now, the vehicle made off when the officer had come out of the police vehicle. So very quickly, that police officer had obviously lost sight of it. So for the next half an hour or so, we have other units in the western area of Gated looking for this BMW. It was about a half an hour later that officers seen the BMW again in the same sort of area. So immediately they got behind the vehicle, activated their lights for the vehicle to pull over, and it made off again, headed towards the direction of the A1. During that short period of time, the lead vehicle made way for other more experienced trained officers, tactical support officers in different vehicles to take the lead for the pursuit. So now the control room will be updated and the authorization is given for the pursuit to go ahead. Now, it was described in court that at some point on a road approaching the A1 from the Swalwell area, it was being driven in such a manner that it actually hit the offside curb. So this is a vehicle that's out of control. It's veered to the other side, hit the offside curb, but managed to gain control and then go onto the A1. I must stress at this point, so that there's likely to be 3 or 4 vehicles involved. This vehicle has to be stopped. There is no question about it. There is no way, and we wouldn't expect it of our police officers, to see a vehicle and a driver behaving like this, where anything could be going on, and to say, just let it go, we'll knock on somebody's door the following morning. I don't know what world people think that happens with the police. The police are trained to do a specific job. That's the situation they found themselves in, and they executed their procedures, from what I heard, to the letter. And also as well, we should mention that, pursuits are dangerous. They can be high risk because there are a lot of unknown variables going on, which is why they do the regular commentary of what's going on. But anything can happen. People do get seriously injured, and occasionally, unfortunately, people get killed in pursuits. So the proportionality of the pursuit and the appropriateness and whether it's legal or not is being constantly, dynamically risk assessed. And based on the information that was available at the time, the authority was to go ahead. We need to get this vehicle detained. Now we're on the A1 travelling northbound. If you're not familiar with the area, Newcastle is on our right hand side. And the speeds that were described in court were in excess of 120 mile an hour. 120 mile an hour by a driver that doesn't have any insurance, has only had 3 driving lessons, has already almost lost control of it as it approached the A1. So now we have 3 or 4 police vehicles pursuing this vehicle at high speed, dangerous speeds. Officers putting their lives at risk now to bring this vehicle to a safe standstill. And it was at the moment where they were about to execute what you call a TAC procedure, tactical pursuit and containment procedure, whereby vehicles would come alongside and cut in front of it slightly to force the vehicle to slow down and to come to a stop. As the vehicles were getting into position, is my understanding, is that at that particular point, at 119 miles an hour, Mazia Azabunyard, with his female friend that he had in the front of the car, who was on a first date, who was also screaming and pleading with him to stop because she thought somebody was going to be killed. At that moment, at 119 miles an hour, he decided to do an emergency stop in the middle of the A1 northbound carriageway, just as officers were coming in to do their TAC procedure. I don't know if you've ever had to try and do some sort of quick stop on a motorway or main road when you've been out driving, but you can only imagine how scary that must have been, because the police officers would have had a couple of seconds delay in their reaction behind the BMW. And if you didn't know, on average, a vehicle travelling at 120 miles an hour will take around about 300 metres to stop. The length of 3 football pitches, around about a third of that is thinking time. Those distances go like that. And, well, you can just picture and imagine the scene, this emergency braking procedure that Mazia has now done, this extraordinary decision that he's made at those speeds in the middle of the carriageway, is absolutely astonishing. With all the will in the world, with all the training, I fail to see how you can just legislate for that sort of reckless decision at those sort of speeds, to slam on your brakes just as you're about to surround a car in the A1. How nobody got killed, I have no idea. But that particular action in itself caused collisions amongst the police vehicle. But the vehicle, the unmarked BMW behind, I don't know what sort of distance it was behind, but bearing in mind, travelling at 120 miles an hour, this vehicle behind wasn't following at a safe distance to see what the crack was. This vehicle is involved in the pursuit. It is closing in to bring to a stop this vehicle and to apprehend whoever is in that vehicle, because they may be dangerous, there may be weapons. Nobody has any idea of what's going on. That BMW behind is trying to catch up. So whatever distance that it was clearly within 300 metres of the vehicles in front, because it'll have seen in the distance what has happened at some point and then done everything it can to avoid the collision. Now, the position of the vehicles at the time covered most of the carriageway. And if you've got to brake suddenly at those sort of speeds, it's difficult to control your vehicle. They can't just carefully and calmly negotiate around. They're going to collide with the vehicles in front, whatever's going to happen. It's impossible for the vehicle behind to avoid that collision. And of course, it ploughs into the back, flips onto its side, and you have the scene that you've seen on the TV. Absolute carnage. 5 police vehicles wrecked, 7 police officers injured. Some of them were unconscious. Some of them had to be cut out of their vehicles. Of course, Maziar was arrested for dangerous driving, etc. I won't go into all of that. But I just want to finish off by saying, if you haven't grasped what's happened here and grasped the understanding that the police did a brilliant job that night, they were in no way to blame for what happened. They're highly trained, and that collision and pile-up happened because of the reckless actions of that 20-year-old young lad who didn't have a driving licence, who for whatever reason panicked, slammed into an emergency stop as quickly as he could from 119 miles an hour. That is how the collision occurred. That is what was discussed in court and accepted by everybody concerned, including the defence barrister, whose job it is to pick holes in the prosecution case. That driver who ploughed into the back was in no way to blame. They could do nothing to escape that collision. And not only should they not receive any sort of criticism, but they should and will probably be commended for their actions on that night. They will probably receive commendations for their professionalism and for their bravery in what could have ended up as an absolutely tragic incident. Luckily, the injuries were only relatively minor, with significant concussion and whiplash injuries. But one of the officers, she received some fairly significant soft tissue damage to one of her knees and some nerve damage in her back, which is going to render her inoperable for quite a few months. It's estimated it could take about 6 months before that officer makes a full recovery physically, never mind whatever psychological interruptions there might be to her day-to-day life, and the other officers concerned as well. But it was discussed in court for a while about the frustration that they were limited to, or the CPS were limited to, only charged with dangerous driving and not causing serious injury by dangerous driving. For example, the Liverpool driver at the parade recently, he was charged with those offences because serious injury in legal terms means GBH. And ordinarily GBH means in legal terms life-changing injuries, the most serious injuries you could possibly have. And even in my opinion, it seems that that threshold unfortunately just wasn't met for GBH, which meant that they could only charge Maziar with dangerous driving. Now, dangerous driving, and of course as well, failed to stop twice on 2 occasions. The first time when he was pulled over, the second time when they activated the lights and he didn't pull over. 2 times failed to stop, driving otherwise in accordance with a licence, and of course no insurance. Those secondary charges don't carry custodial sentences. Dangerous driving carries a maximum of a 2-year prison sentence. And like any other crime, in order to get the maximum sentence for a crime, you have to go to trial at Crown Court and being found guilty by a jury. That's the extreme. Bit like the Sycamore Gap 2. They pleaded not guilty, took it all the way to Crown Court, big trial, the jury found them not guilty. So the maximum sentence for criminal damage is 10 years. So they're going to receive significant custodial sentences. Despite the carnage this driver caused, and the injuries he caused, and the damage he caused, and the inconvenience of the A1 being shut for about 13 hours. He could only be served, and because he made an early guilty plea when he first appeared at Magistrates Court, which qualified him to an automatic 1/3 off here in the UK. So the maximum you could receive was around about 14 months, maybe a little bit more. And he'll serve 40% of that, because that's the same for everybody now, due to recent legislation that's been passed, minus 22 days that he'd already spent on TAG. So he wasn't treated leniently, he didn't get off lightly because of where he's from and the colour of his skin, as many of you out there have claimed. I've had to delete most of those messages. He was treated like everybody else in England in terms of the offence he committed and going to Crown Court to be sentenced. Now, he was sentenced to 14 months in that Young Offenders Institute, because Young Offenders Institutes are for 15 to 21-year-olds. And of course, he's facing a 3-year driving disqualification as well, which will prevent him from taking any driving lessons. It will have significant impacts on any future insurance claims, but it also gives the courts more flexibility of sentencing should he come out and decide to go driving again. And if and when he's caught, he'll be sent straight back to youth offenders or prison if he's old enough to finish off his sentence. I hope that made sense to you, or certainly most of you. I know this is not going to convince the haters out there, those who are having their views and prejudices groomed online. It's not going to change those views, but I'm hoping most of you now at least understand more or less what happened on that particular night. So I hope you found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And of course, watch the original video that I did after attending court last Monday, and I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching.